Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another live session with us at Dream Dinner. Good morning if you're on the west coast of the United States, and good afternoon if you're in Europe, as I am. I'm super happy to have my guest here today, Jason, which was the VP marketing at Metadata, which was a company that I only followed from the sideline, but increasingly got intrigued by their quite unique marketing and what seemed like a lot of growth. But now that you can study the results of of Jason's work on his LinkedIn profile as well, you can actually see that he's probably one of the few people in the world that has actually been part of 10xing ARR in within 3 years. And I don't know, Jason, would you define that as that's probably as good as it gets for most startup scale up company growth wise, right?
Oh yeah, especially now. I mean, we'll see how difficult or easy that is, because now I'm working with a bunch of clients, and hopefully they don't all expect that.
And that would be pretty good
right now, but yeah, there's some things, and we'll talk about them today. But a lot of things you can do to just try and get there and just like really kind of jumpstart or supercharge your growth. And yeah, we'll get some learnings from those 3 years. It wasn't all me for sure. I had some like really solid partners in that, like Mark Huber and several others. But yeah, we're gonna get into a bunch of that stuff today.
Absolutely, and even just looking at you and Mark's relationship from the outside, it really seemed like the big marketing bromance. Was like sometimes you find people you just work really well with together with, and excited to hear more about that. Jason, I haven't really been studying like the way backs of your LinkedIn profile, but how did you end up becoming a marketer and B2B marketing leader nowadays?
It was kind of by accident. I won't go too far back, but I started my career in kind of soft IT. So I just have a business degree, but fairly technical, upbringing, honestly. Like my mom was one of the first women in mainframe computing with punch cards back in the 60s. Wow. And so yeah, I kind of had that around me. And yeah, so, I started in like IT project management, and I was working at AT&T Wireless, this huge, wireless carrier. And I saw all these like consultants coming in and just like doing what they were doing. And I was like, I want to do that. And so then I started consulting kind of in IT. And then I got a project which was around website analytics, and it was doing it at Expedia, and Expedia has a ton of data. And so got that, and that was when marketing or website analytics was still in IT.
Yeah.
And then that turned into like a marketing operations job. And interestingly, like a lot of people start in startups and then they kind of scale into enterprise, but I started in enterprise. So I was working at like Microsoft and Getty Images and Tableau and Workfront and some, other larger organizations doing marketing operations. I was one of the first VPs of marketing ops ever. And so had a 60 some odd person marketing operations team at Tableau, which is crazy.
What?
Yeah. And then I got like some sub startup experience, which is kind of like in between startup and kind of when you take off. I was like, I kind of like this. I really didn't like the stuffiness of large organizations, just couldn't get anything done. And I felt my job was just like either just managing people only or, playing the corporate politics game, which I don't play very well. And so, okay, I think startups are for me. And yeah, really branched out into running all of marketing from there, and took that role at Metadata as the first marketer and like the 12th person hired there. And then just kind of a little bit learned as I went, but had all of these thoughts and ideas that I wanted to try out. And then, like I mentioned earlier, working with somebody like Mark, just kind of like make those things happen, just a good yin and yang. We had a lot of great successes, and we were really public about it. And so a lot of people kind of followed us or kind of knew what was going on. So yeah, it was just like a perfect storm, but in a good way. And so like a CEO, Gil, that was just really supportive and wanted to do interesting and crazy things, and didn't need every single dollar spent tied to, a near-term outcome. really supported us and pushed us. And then, yeah, and then a really good team around me to help execute.
Super nice, Jason. It seems like you've been blessed by having like the technicals, sort of technical skills, like come natural to you, and then you probably learned the marketing craft as you went along then.
Yeah, I had, being in the leadership, like the marketing leadership team at these big organizations, I did learn all that stuff through osmosis, product marketing and brand marketing, and had some really good CMOs that I worked with that I was able to learn from through those years. And so that's where I was like, hey, I'm ready. I'm not great at these things, but nobody's great at everything. And so you hire in the areas that you're not great at. And so I've considered my specialty is really around like performance marketing and growth, and demand gen is really what I'd say. And obviously the ops part. And so my kind of going in approach or strategy really kind of starts there, informed with data and things like that. And always and then trying to do unique things that normally can't scale, but you figure out how to scale those through technology. And so that's kind of been a big part of my strategy.
Super cool, man. I still can't get that 60-person ops team out of my mind, but I'll let that be the past. Just before we proceed with all the questions and anecdotes, then like for those of you who are watching us now, just take the chance and type into the chat if there's anything you'd like to ask Jason or myself about. It's an open office, so we're just here to share as much knowledge as we can. But if we are to, maybe let's start, Jason, with what was metadata when you joined, and what were kind of the first things you started fiddling with to see some traction?
Yeah, we were sub $1 million, and it was right when COVID started, so it was like in the beginning of 2020. I was consulting for metadata on the side, and we kind of started to jumpstart some things, but it was really only part-time, and I was doing that with a colleague of mine at the time.
Yeah.
But that was just kind of getting some of the foundations in place, kind of figuring out email and content, and starting pretty slow. But then we got some funding, and that's when I started. And honestly, one of the first things that really took off was LinkedIn conversation ads, and using that incentivized demo.
Damn, I've forgotten them. Yeah, they were great in the beginning.
Yeah, and nobody was using them at the time. Conversation ads were brand new at the time, and I just happened upon them. I was like going into LinkedIn to run some ads, normal ads, and I was like, "What's this?" And it was like this new button that was like conversation ads beta. And then I remembered that I really hated incentivized anything before that. I was like, I remember the first time I was working at Workfront, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to set up a booth at this event, and we're going to give people $25 to do a G2 review on site." I'm like, "Oh, that's bullshit." Why would you pay somebody and I didn't understand this in my mind. It's like, but I was like, you know what? The way I can justify it in my mind is I'm paying you for your time. Your time is valuable, and I want to recognize that time that you're going to spend. And we need awareness. And so nobody knows about us. They don't know what we do. And if we target the right people and get them on the phone at least and get to show them, we had all these aha moments going off with people like, "Oh my God, I've never seen anything like that before." Or I don't believe that it does it that way. But you get through that demo, and then it's kind of sunk in their mind. And we were getting it at just super low cost, super low cost per demo with the right people that had never heard of us before. And so that's really what really started the ride. And we used conversation ads like almost that entire time I was there. It slowly became, it kind of became more expensive, and it started to work a little bit less. And, you got people like just coming in for the gift card, and you got to figure out how to tease those out. And we really refined it. But yeah, that was kind of some of the early tactics. And then being able to hire started jump-starting the content. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mark. I believe, are they sunsetting the conversation ads now?
I don't know. I mean, I honestly still use them for like one or two of my clients today, because they're usually it's like in a market that hasn't seen them before. And that's what will work a little bit better. Like one of my clients sells to associations, and associations are just kind of stuck. Like nobody listened if you're an association, but tend to be stuck like 5 to 7 years behind from a like maturity curve. And so find new audiences that have not really seen them before, it can still work. But a lot of people, if we're selling to sales and marketing and SaaS, like it's like, oh man, I've seen that, been there, done that. And so, so it's, I don't know, but I know they don't work in Europe, because like there's privacy issues. So they haven't been on in Europe for like a long time, but I'm not sure if they're going to sunset it, but they've done some weird things to it. They created that other inbox, and so it's not as clean as it used to be, but hopefully LinkedIn will come up with some new stuff here pretty soon.
Yeah, there's really some there's a bunch of interesting marketing learnings already in what you're saying here, because when a tactic works, you really gotta milk it. And
oh yeah,
new advertisement technology is often good because people are not so much on the defense.
Yeah.
And also, like, can you spot industries like we're selling to a lot to marketers today, and you are as well, and people are so trained in spotting marketing and sales tactics, whereas if you go to your associations, then what's this new flashy thing? Let's click click here. But
yeah, absolutely. And it's like a blessing to sell to marketers and a curse to sell to marketers at the same time, because you're right. You have to, especially in B2B SaaS, it's just so saturated. So you really have to figure out what is, what's new, what's different. If there's something new tactic comes out, you really want to jump on that. And like you said, kind of milk it as much as you can. And we'll talk about this maybe a little bit, but that's where an experimentation framework and mindset comes into play, and is so important in B2B SaaS, is because the things that are working are not going to work forever or for very long. And if you don't have a constant stream of experiments going, you're going to fall behind, because 2/3 of your experiments are probably going to fail. And so, so that's a really important part of marketing.
I still also remember the honeymoon period on Facebook as well, where you could make these lookalike audiences. It was pre-GDPR, so you can just take all the emails you had, throw in there, make a lookalike audience, and it would perform insanely well. And you could even retarget for 180 or 360 days because cookies was not getting deleted and so forth. So if you have something that works well today, just like milk as long as it works. Wonderful. Let's just, there's a question here, we can just take that straight away. So that's Christian. He's saying, what is your experience with lead gen ads on LinkedIn? What ad format would you suggest for lead gen, image versus document ads?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I haven't played around with document ads too much myself, but I know some of my colleagues have, and they have pretty good experience, they're having pretty good successes with them. I mean, it really, a lot of it always comes down to the content too, especially if you're using a document ad. If it's just like AI generated clickbait content, then it's like, you might get some clicks on it, but then it's not really going to help you down funnel. And so I'd say, and then in terms of like an image ad or video ad, I think if you're trying to get to like a demo, then you got to be really targeted, and you've got to retargeting, and you've got to have like unique offers. It can't just be like, get a demo, no, everybody's like, if I want a demo, I'll go to your website and I'll request a demo. So it's got to be something unique. You got to have a unique offer to kind of, seed in there. And you can have things like, for example, if you can do this, hey, we'll build a sandbox for you, or, hey, we've got a product tour on the website, and specific to your use case, and like really understand their use case or understand their vertical and have something specific for them that is unique. And so from a lead gen perspective, and then, if you're going to do content lead gen, then you've just got to have a really solid follow-up process, because that's just the start of the relationship. And your SDR team or your marketing nurture, it's got to be really valuable and like provide value back to that person. It can't just be like, oh, you downloaded a piece of content, you're ready to buy, sweet, let's get you on a demo and get you the contract.
That's something I've the marketer's confessions, that like I've not really succeeded with running a lead gen thing on LinkedIn. I've succeeded in the way that I've collected a lot of leads, but what you typically discover is that if you go too broad in the appeal of the ebook, it's such a far bridge or chasm that you need to cross to reach any kind of sales intent. So I'd be eager to hear kind of like if you went a little bit deeper into what should you put into these ebooks that you offer, and how tight a ship can you actually run after those leads are collected.
Yeah, and then any kind of content, the best possible content you can create is something that's hard to build. So like, it's not going to be something that you just like thought leadership AI generated content, founder story. That stuff is not really, I mean, it's like interesting and it's a good mix to have, but really you got to get into something that is hard to build. And that's something like a benchmark report. So if you've got all of like your customer data in your platform and you can create some unique insights about that, that's helpful for people. Like this is one of the things we did at Metadata, and it was by far our biggest SEO drive. And like in terms of content, and I think that's one thing we actually at one point gated or tried to gate. We didn't gate anything, but this was like one of the things that I think we did one year. But it's like, it's that first party, excuse me, first party data that nobody else has access to, and then deriving insights from that, or doing your own primary research, you know, out in the audience with your audience and getting some like, again, just like surveys and data points that they can't find in other places. And then the biggest benefit is if those data points then somehow support your platform being better than other platforms, because then you're not only giving them some like interesting data to operate with, but then you're also kind of subtly saying, and by the way, none of the other competitors can get you here. And so it kind of can be a double whammy.
So that's the content part of it. Then kind of just what is the automation process thing you typically would recommend to have come after the
automation, like a drip campaign or something like that for marketing. It's like, okay, you know, but like the best way to follow up is personalized follow-up, you know? And so handing that off to the assigned SDR and then training the SDR on how to build relationships with people first before just like running a sequence, you know, and these things are just not working as well today as they were. I don't know if they ever really worked, but you know, everybody has to keep in mind, everybody looks at these email rates and open rates. They're all not right. None of these rates are accurate because especially if you're selling to the enterprise or really anybody else, they've got spam filters that actually open your email and they click through all the links, and those things get sent back to HubSpot or your, you know, marketing automation tool. And they don't know the difference between a person doing it and a machine doing it. So none of your, like, I actually have a client right now, like outreach shows we have like a 75% open rate on our emails. I'm like, no, we don't. We probably have like maybe 10%. And so it just shows how clouded it can be. So personalized follow-up and make it, you know, do the research. And this is where I talk about how important it is to have a tight audience, you know? So like one of the things that I'm really passionate about is activity equals action. So the more activity that you have going on to your target audience, they see you over here in an ad, they see you over here on LinkedIn organic, they see your CEO posting things, they get an email from you, then they see a different ad and they're in the same platform and they have 5 or 6 different ads. It's about the frequency. And so it's not great. You don't want to brag about having a large audience. So like, that's not the right way to do it because you're going to spread your stuff too thin. You might have a frequency of 1 or 2 to each person, and they're just not going to get it. They're not going to see enough. So the psychological part of this is when people see a lot of different things, you got a product announcement in ads, you got a product announcement in email, you've got an event invite, you know, going on. And then you pepper in some demo requests. They see all these things, and the psychological kind of process that happens is, wow, they must be doing a lot. They must be really growing fast. They must be changing their product and updating it all the time. And that really kind of drives intent and action towards your product. So I'm a big fan of, you got to really tighten your audience and really be honest about it. Like, don't say, no, I think we can sell to these. I think we can sell to these. Who are you selling to? You know, who is buying your product? And then double down on that. And like one of my clients also, they have 2 products. One is only 10% of like what they sell, and it's fairly new to them. And the other is like 90%. And they're spending a lot of effort on that 10%, even though pipeline is down. And I'm like, listen, you've got the cash cow over here, milk that as much as possible to kind of catch up on pipeline, and then we'll figure out this other part. And so, so it's just important to focus on what you're good at, focus on the audience that really, you know, is your core audience, and be honest with yourself about what that is. Even if it's small, it's like, okay, that's small, but that's kind of a benefit because we can have more frequency against them. We can do more things. And so, yeah.
I think that's typically also one of the first advice I give to whenever I speak to like smaller companies is, have you defined your ideal customer profile? No. Okay. Well, we have to start here because you can't boil the ocean. You can't sell to everybody. So we need, and like your little budget, we don't have resources to hit everybody up anyway. And I'm curious to hear kind of what are the benefits you've seen from like going the anti-broad and actually going very specific, what did you do at metadata around these things?
Yeah, so at metadata, one of the things, and I'll talk about targeting real quick. So targeting is not industry, company size, headquarters location. It's not that, that's the smallest part of it. So the best targeting is you have to bring in as much data as you can from as many sources as you possibly can. So you want first party data from your website. You want several intent providers, and you want to triangulate intent, for example, and you want to use unique data providers. Like I'm a big fan of KeyPlay, and because they scrape website like a lot, especially for B2B SaaS, they scrape a ton of websites and get just all these interesting signals. You want these signals so that you can really order your target list by 1 to N and not have 1 to 1,000 all have the same score. And that's what happens when you just use the basic elements of targeting. So you've got to broaden it out. You want to have 40, 50 different signals in targeting, and you want to weight those signals properly, because that's what's actually going to create that list. Then you can say, okay, maybe there's 2,000 that kind of fit in the tier, but we can order it from 1 to 2,000, and I can chunk off that top 200, and I can really focus on them for ABM plays, for example.
Huh.
I can't remember the question you asked because I went off on the targeting piece.
No, that is a key play I've not seen before, so I'll definitely be checking up on that. No, I was asking kind of the benefits of actually narrowing down your ICP.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. Obviously, the first one is you can be more personalized, when you have a narrower audience. But then also, when you experiment, you want to experiment with different audiences. So that's a good place to experiment, is like, okay, and not just adding audience to one campaign, but like maybe creating a whole separate campaign and just having this new audience in there and having it a little bit more personalized. So that's some places you can play with expanding your audience, but you want to really kind of focus on who you sell well to. And you just kind of use that.
We've even used that at Dream Data to align the whole company about agreeing this is who we're for. So like, this is who marketing attracts. This is who sales teams try to sell to. These are the ones that customer success need to succeed with. And these are the ones we build product for. And if you have that kind of North Star direction, it can really help your company move a lot faster in the same direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, there's a lot of questions coming in, but I'll just hold back a little bit. So you switched those conversation ads on at metadata, and things started to really roll. What was kind of the next layer of things that really hit it off at metadata?
Yeah, and one of the important things to consider in this is to get the freedom to do the things that are risky or that might take a while before they actually bear fruit. You have to nail that short-term demand, and that's kind of what conversation ads help us do. It creates that buffer where you're like, oh shit, just through this, I'm actually kind of beating my pipeline target.
Yeah.
Sweet. So now I can start to experiment and think about the longer term things, because that's what's really going to carry you. And you don't want to continuously increase your spend on advertising. Like the goal should be to decrease your spend over time on advertising and become less reliant on it and become more reliant on your brand and organic and things like that. So one of the things we did is double down on content. After Mark, our first hire was a content person, and so to really like look after that, create unique content, maybe, get our SEO engine running. But then really after that was community. And so we knew we had built, excuse me, an audience. Mark and I were posting on LinkedIn. People were loving what we were doing. We're building in public. So we kind of had this built-in audience. And we had a lot of fans of metadata who were users and like customers. So we're like, okay, let's actually hire a full-time community person and let's do these events. So like we had that first demand event, and through our connections and through like broadcasting this, we were able to get in the first year like 4,400 registrants for this virtual event. And then we basically did that, and like these people became folks we could talk to. It was like, okay, they're listening to us. They like to participate in things that we're doing. We can communicate with them throughout the year. And then the second year we had 7,500 people join. And then I think the third year when I wasn't there, it was even more. I think they got up close to 10,000. But from there, then we created a community. We created the demand community, and the the benefit there, well, we hired a full-time person to do it. That's important. You don't want it to be an afterthought. And this was something Mark had to talk me into. I was like, no, man, we can just manage it ourselves. We'll just pop in there and like answer questions. No, I'm glad that he, really pushed the issue. And he's like, no, we need to hire somebody full-time to do this. And I kind of had to sell it to Gil as well, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And we found absolutely the right person, Katie Ray, to manage that.
Yeah.
Because she was active in the community. She had actually, experience in marketing. She'd built communities or participated in some of the bigger communities, knew what to do, and just was really engaging and kind, and like facilitating, and had really good ideas for what, things to do in the community. And it was able to start it.
I can testify, because you get the sense that she's read a little bit up on each person's CV, so she's able to tag people where their knowledge is relevant, and that makes you feel that it's not just one more off the shelf. It's actually here people actually care a little bit about you.
Yeah, and excuse me, the way we started it was kind of with our customers, but like with some people that were really close to us, and we said we're only going to do personal invites for the first 2 months, and only get up to 200 people to start, because we want these first 200 people to basically build the community. So we actually took some of the stress off of ourselves. Instead of saying, oh, we have to have everything perfect right out of the gate and have 2,000 people join right away. It's like, no, let's actually have these founding members of the community build it into what we want this thing to be. And that was so smart, that we did that, because people felt like, yeah, I'm actually part of this. I'm telling you what I want. I'm building the community that I want to be a part of. And then once they build that, they feel really associated with it. And then they'll invite their friends and they'll invite their colleagues and people. And that was the network effect of that really helped us to grow that community. And then the engagement we were getting in that community was higher than most communities, most communities' engagement. And so that also continued to feed it.
I have to ask, kind of, how are you able to get like 7,000 people to sign up to
I don't know. So, I mean, it was crazy. We did, it was like kind of following on from just the audience we'd built on LinkedIn, but we ran a lot of ads. So we spent quite a bit of money on ads to get people there as well. And what was nice is the first year we had like really dramatic support from LinkedIn itself. Like they actually gave us, I think somewhere, I won't say the number, but a lot of money, basically, that I thought it was a lot of money at the time, and funded a big part of our ability to grow it. And so they were a big sponsor. Nice. So that was a big part of it, is like driving. And we were metadata. So we had access to the platform and could really, really optimize our ads specifically for that event.
Yeah.
And then it was the speakers, that we had. So Mark and I leveraged our relationships and Gil's relationships to bring like really solid speakers. And we just said, we had the intent of, what is an event that we would actually go to? Because we saw events becoming more too commercial, where like the events were mostly focused on selling sponsorships and then having those sponsors do the content. And it was like, that just becomes a commercial most of the time. They don't put, time and effort into it. It's not really insightful. We said, we want people to leave this conference with tactical, specific, new things that they can do and take back to their jobs. And I think a combination of all those things is what really drove that high of attendance. We had like, the first year we had a 41% live attendee rate too, which is kind of unheard of for most people. Most people are sitting in the low 30s at the highest, maybe even lower than that. And so we had like really high live attendance as well, which was nice, because we had a lot of engagement going on during each session. People were communicating and networking and like making comments, and just like, it was just really, really engaging. And so I think that helped then seed. And then from that point, your second year, you can kind of assume you're going to get, if you did it well, you can assume those 4,400 people, at least like 80% of them are probably going to come back and sign up. So then you're just building on top of that to grow that audience each year from there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Your sales team must have been extremely busy following up on the days after that event.
Well, and the funny thing is, we told them they can't follow up. We said, you can't follow up with these people right away. Like, you can give them time, like let the dust settle a little bit, because just because they came to our event does not mean they want to buy our platform. And that was really not, it was more of a brand building kind of exercise. And so, yeah, sales was like, I told them what they could say. I said, here's what you can say, but not for 2 weeks until, after the conference ends. And we also told our sponsors, we're not sharing the lead list. you're going to be a part of this because you want to be associated with our brand and associated with like doing the right things for demand gen marketers. And so that was a little bit of a, kind of hard sell a little bit, but the right companies were leaned in on that. And so that's kind of how we treated that.
That's very interesting, because you like normally whenever you sign up to a conference, you're bombarded by all the sponsors afterwards. But it must have been hard to go back to the sales team and say, you're not getting those 7,000 leads right now.
Well, here's why they were okay with it, because they at that point had understood how impactful our strong brand was to their activities. So all that, I mean, I had 2 times at Metadata where sales actually asked me to slow down the number of demo requests. They literally said, "Hey, we can't even handle this many." I was like, that's one of my shining moments in my career. It's like being asked by my sales leader to, "Hey man, can you please slow down the demo requests?" Like, I'll never hear that again, ever, I'm sure. But they realized very early on, wow, when I outbound, people know us already and they're happy to take a meeting with me, and it's much easier. So they really trusted the brand aspect of it. And so they were okay with it. They were just like, "Okay, sounds good. Let us know what we can do," and kind of went from there.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what you said earlier about like that hitting your pipeline targets is what liberates you as a marketer to do the more long-term stuff. And I think all of us have found ourselves in this situation where we're behind the MQL number or the sales acceptable leads, and it's kind of it's a mean hamster wheel, because if you're always behind, you're not actually adding to the things that were that builds on top of each other. And
yeah,
how do you navigate that landscape of like chasing the quick returns versus also building for the long term?
It's hard, especially right now. Even most of my clients and most of my colleagues that I talk to are behind on pipeline, and they have been for the last year and a half, probably. And it's due to the recession, and it's also due to the fact that before this little recession, we had way too much money being pumped into these companies with way too high evaluations, and so then the expectation is unreasonable, and it's not even real. It's not based in any kind of reality. And so it's like, oh yeah. And I still have some clients like, "Yeah, we're going to 2X this year." I'm like, "No, you're not. You're not going to 2X this year." And so like, let's not put a false, impossible goal on the heads of our like people that are driving these things, because then they're going to just like throw their hands up and say, "This is impossible. I'm going to miss my bonus. So fuck it." Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I'm not going to pay too much attention to it. You got to be really realistic. Some companies just though can't, because they have all this invested money. And so those are companies I would just say, I don't want to work. I wouldn't work there, because the goals are just going to be too far off of reality, because they have to make this money up, or their investors and they're not going to get money and they're going to run out of cash. And so, so that's the gist of it. But, but there are some things that we can still do. And, this short term, so it's like, you probably have to almost focus maybe 80% of your resources these days on like this near term in quarter plus one pipeline, because that's just the reality of where we're at. But you have to always at least save 20% of that work, or 20% of your resources, to be able to focus on the longer term things that are going to bear fruit, because it's kicking the can up the hill constantly. If you're constantly focused on the short term, it's going to catch up with you at some point, and you're not going to be able to, continue that for too long. And so, so that's what I try and like instill in the people that I work with is, it's fine. We have to focus on the near term, because a lot of the startups I work with, like a couple of them, they don't have a lot of runway. And so it's like, guess what? If we don't hit this, we're not going to have a job in 6 months. So like, we definitely have to focus on this. And then we'll figure it out. And then we'll be able to like, get into the long-term stuff. And then asking company leaders too, to figure out how to like right size the resources or right size the goals to the reality. And so really kind of like, a founder has to be very optimistic, but they also need to be very pessimistic at the same time. They can't be so optimistic that they miss out and they don't see some of these things that could actually steer you away from meeting those goals. They got to be more realistic, and they can't just listen to their investors and, "Oh, if I don't 2X this year, I'm a failure." That's not the case. If you grow by 10% this year, that's great. You know what I mean? Like, you take that as a win. So yeah.
So let me just pick up. There's a long question here from Craig that I want to read out for you. If you're dealing with high value, long lifespan solutions, identifying if decision making is made within your own sales territory or whether there's a central policy governed at parent company, i.e. in the UK. This Have you ever been like been battling this like landscape where there's like parent and child accounts that you need to sell into?
I mean, a little bit. So I think this is kind of getting at the gist of, this is for larger organizations. You know, usually if you're selling, like you're multinational, you're selling global, which I don't really like to do that. Honestly, I prefer just working in the US and Canada. But if you're having to sell globally, or if you are selling globally, first, if you're a small company, that is a big endeavor. And so I actually had one of my clients that's not very big. We had a US sales team and a rest of world sales team. I was like, no, we have to focus on the US only. Let's give up the global thing. I don't want to run ads in 17 countries. You know, I don't want to have to like tie my resources and try and figure that out. So let's focus on that. But a larger company, you know, is going to be multinational and global and trying to sell to other other countries. And I think what we're saying here is like, there's this central strategy and kind of resources. And then how much of that should be dictated in the territories. And, you know, if you're big enough, then you have people, marketers, sellers that are dedicated to those other territories and regions. And it should just be like a light guidance at the top, really around goals and general messaging and how we're going to, you know, how we talk about the product, but then allowing each of the territories to really refine that and make it more like relevant to their market, because those people are going to know the market better than anybody else. And you don't want the centralized strategy to really dictate too much of that. And you want to have flexibility so that each of these territories can kind of operate on their own a little bit. That's a luxury to have if you're a larger company and you have resources that are kind of dedicated to these territories. Sometimes the way that works is they're still all in the US, but they're still specialized in the country that they're trying to sell to. And so that can work as well, but I'm not a huge fan of that. And that's why I kind of stick with the Series A and B. They're usually like just selling to North America.
It's a pretty big market.
It's complicated for me. I don't want to, you know, too much going on. Yeah.
And here we got a question on ABM. So how would you navigate like leadership's objections to actually focusing on account-based marketing?
Yeah. So sometimes
ABM is also one of these. There's not necessarily that near-term pickup of return. It's going to take 6 or 12 months before you see it coming back.
Yeah. And sometimes like the problem is leadership. So if you're working with leadership that just doesn't either get marketing or thinks that they're fully sales led and just marketing is a dentist that they need, you know, like nobody wants the dentist, but everybody has to have it. You know, you don't want people to think about your marketing team as the dental like function. And so sometimes it's really based on the founders and their understanding. And so sometimes you just have to figure out how to educate them, bringing in other examples from companies that they look up to. Sometimes, like even with Gil, I'd have to bring in a third-party marketer like Dave Gerhardt to help me like seed in some of the things that we knew. But when you're all internal and working together, sometimes the leader just needs that third-party input or that third-party like successes or case studies to just start to like understand more, because they're not always going to trust they should trust them, but like they're going to question them and they're going to want other proof points, not just that you're saying that this is going to work. So you need to show them why. And you got to bring like data to the table around that. And you got to bring third-party people that they look up to, or a peer, a CEO that's running that kind of play, that's having some successes. And so it's really dealing with that piece that's going to unlock most of it. The second thing would be, if you can't do that, just ask for an experiment. You know what I mean? You treat this as an experiment and prove it to yourself. There's no better really like proof than that. If you can prove it in your own market with your own targets, but just take a small budget and say, okay, we're going to run an ABM program on 50 accounts. We're going to spend only 5% of our budget on this. Potentially, we're going to come up with, and when I talk about experiments, it's like, it's an MVP. You want it to be like almost embarrassed about like what you're bringing to the table, just barely not embarrassed about it, because you don't want to spend too many resources on it. You don't want it to be perfect. Like perfect gets in the way of activity and action. You know, you don't want to let that happen. So yeah, just run a small experiment and just set the expectations, I think that would be the third thing. So don't tell them what you think they want to hear. You got to be confident in yourself, and you got to be confident in what you believe, and just say it very confidently. If you say it in a meek way, they're going to pick up on that and they're going to tear it apart. If you're like, no, this is going to work. This is the expectation though. Like, don't expect one lead to come in for 2 months. But then after that, and then it's an experiment. So then you set the expectation, like, some of these experiments are going to fail. We're going to look at the failure. We're going to see, can it be optimized to something that we can actually like make something out of, or do we just have to trash it all together and throw it out? And just be realistic and set those goals up front too. So you know, all right, the success metric, but also what's the failure metric on these experiments, where I know, okay, I'm going to cut bait and stop spending money and resources on that.
That's really good, Jason. And to be fair, to the CFOs and CEOs, they're just trying to allocate the company's money to the most effectiveness that they can find. Should they hire a salesperson, an engineer, or run an ABM program? I'm not too much of an expert on it, on ABM metrics, Jason. I don't know about you, but yeah. So you said kind of like, what is the success scenario and what is the failure scenario? What are the kind of things that one should be looking at when it comes to if you don't know, then it's fair as well. But
with ABM, there's definitely some things you want to look at, especially with ABM. So with ABM, you're starting with a very narrow target account list, and so one of the first things you want to look at is penetration within those accounts. Like, are you getting, there's IP lookup technology nowadays. You can see impressions and clicks in LinkedIn. So you want to make sure you're actually getting people from those target accounts in your funnel in some way, even if it's just like they visited the website, or they attended one of our events, or they clicked on one of our ads on LinkedIn. That's what you want to start with. You need that penetration first to know, okay, I'm actually now at least in this account, I'm in their ear a little bit. I know what kind of channels that they're engaging with me on. So that's one of the first things, is how are we penetrating those target accounts that we've set up? And then if you're not, then you got to like run some other experiments or revisit that list. Like, is this the right list? Intent data is incredibly important to use when it comes to ABM programs, because you want to nail the people first that have they're leaning in some way, or that showing some intent for your category or product. And so, and I like to not rely on one source of intent, because one source of intent is very biased in whatever way they're tracking intent. So I like to have at least 3 sources of intent.
Could you just say what would that tangibly be, those 3 sources?
So you can use like 6 Sense, for example, is a decent source of intent data, and they give you like a nice, interesting like sales stage that you can potentially, run off of. One of my favorite sources of intent is G2 intent data, because it's very, very direct. It's like, this company was on your category page, or this company was on your product page on G2. Although G2, I'm just going to tell you now, stop trying to raise your prices and trying to make too much money, because no one's going to buy it. You got to like temper those increases. They tried to increase price on me like 2x one year, and I was like, no way. So G2, come on, like, help us out here a little bit. You're not that great. And then a third can be like a Bombora, although like some of Bombora data is in 6 Sense, so there's going to be some bleed over. And then there's, like I mentioned, KeyPlay. KeyPlay has these signals that can be treated as intent as well. And so, just kind of using some of these triangulations, and then prioritizing the ones that show intent in all 3 of these areas in some way, those become your like top target accounts, because like, okay, probably something to this if all 3 of these sources is saying that account is leaning in some way.
Yeah. And do you then work with some kind of marketing qualified account number, and then now the sales team gets them once they hit a certain engagement rate or something like that?
Yeah. And it's really about like ordering those, like I mentioned earlier, from 1 to N, and having like a different score, not just like, oh, these top 200 all have the same score. It's like, come up with weighting and different things across, ideally, like I was saying, 40 plus different signals. And like data points, so that you actually can order them in a way. And then, then it becomes kind of a fluid list, and it's kind of always changing. And you don't want to always change. You want to lock it in for at least a couple of months, but then like reevaluate this data and see, okay, now what's floating to the top, and how does that change who we're reaching out to?
Super nice. I want to go back. You said you mentioned SEO a little bit before, and SEO was kind of my first love in marketing, or at least as a real job back in 2009 or so. I joined this vintage music instrument platform where we were like we grew from 0 to like 100,000 organic visits a month. So kind of you never forget that thrill of it's free traffic just floating in every month. But I'm gonna ask like a generic question. Like, do you still think there's a place for SEO today? Like now that the competition is so intense, there's so much AI crap being put out.
Yeah.
Is it still a valid tactic for many companies, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and I think it has to be for some companies. Like companies that are on high volume, kind of low ASP products. They can't spend a lot of money. They can't have a high customer acquisition cost, and so it has to be a part. Organic in general has to be a part of a lot of strategies. And so yeah, it's changing though wildly, like you mentioned, because of AI. But there are actually ways of using AI in a way that can help your SEO performance. And so, but it can't be straight AI. It's got to be thoughtful AI with really solid prompts, and then with really good briefs behind them, and then human edited on the back end. And so there are ways of scaling this without hiring an entire team. There are services out there, companies that can kind of help bridge it between, and I learned this kind of strategy from Brendan Hufford, but strategies you can use to build out like some of the initial content and run it through like copy editors that are like on staff through another service, and just kind of get that AI start and then human editing, towards the end, so that ideally the search engines don't kind of sniff it out as AI. But I think the search engines are going to have to catch up too, because things are changing so rapidly with AI. So I'd expect a lot of algorithm changes to happen more frequently than they used to.
Yeah.
But the best thing, and one of the best places to start is most people start SEO with like, here are the keywords that I think we should rank for. Here are the white space, but they don't actually talk to customers. They don't talk to customers and say, what content were you needing when you kind of found our solution? What's the kind of content that people in your role need or want nowadays?
Yeah.
And like interview customers actually, like surprising idea there. Ask them what they want, and then build the content around that and focus. You want a ratio of like one high value piece to maybe 5 to 10 kind of SEO based articles. You want to make sure you're driving anchor based content as well, like these benchmark reports, like the stuff that requires first party data, stuff coming out of your platform, surveys. You want to make sure you're focused on that, and then like filling in the gaps with more of this like automated based technical kind of SEO content.
Yeah, it's and just to back up what you like across the board, when we look at our customers account, all the ones that end up chasing these very broad keywords, there's typically zero value associated with visits on these very broad terms, because there's zero buying intention behind it. Whereas if you can go super duper specific about something like the most geeky things, those are the people who are actually trying to solve a problem that will be searching for these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I don't know, when you've got just a ton of content, is that really helpful? And you also, a couple of other things, you want to revisit articles that you've already written, you know what I mean? So you want to update those. So, use your data to understand like which of our articles has performed well in the past and might be dropping off a little bit in performance, and make that part of the strategy is like updating past articles. It's kind of like repurposing content a little bit. Like you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. A lot of times just go back into the content, really be good at analyzing it and seeing what's rising, what's falling, and optimize those as well as part of that strategy.
Absolutely. And speaking on this discipline, then Danny is asking about, let's say you don't have any budget. How do you go about creating and collecting leads? So SEO is one. You can write a lot of stuff. What's some of your other tactics that you look towards when it's zero CAC or low CAC acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. This is not the best position to be in, although a lot of us are in this position, or at least we have like fewer resources.
Yeah.
So, I mean, LinkedIn organic. So get your founder on LinkedIn, start to build in public, start to grow that audience. Company pages are not really going to do it. Like company pages, they get deprioritized by LinkedIn, honestly, like because LinkedIn's trying to generate human connections. So, you can focus on, and if you have a really good social media manager, you can maybe make something out of your company page, but it's not the best or fastest or easiest way. So you want to get your founders, you want to use LinkedIn automation tools to basically grow their network within your target accounts. You can just set up like, use Apollo or, you know, one of these data tools to say, okay, here's my target account list. Here's my potential buyers. Or from a CEO perspective, connect CEO to CEO. You know, it's like, get those relationships going, because it's another psychological part. Oh, I've seen them before. You know, I've seen them somewhere. Now I'm seeing an ad. So organic LinkedIn. And if your founder is hesitant, don't give up. Push them on it. Hire somebody to help them, you know, even. And so the second piece is email. And a lot of people want to poo-poo on email, and it's hard, but you can actually, if you use email in the right way. So for example, again, using a data tool like Apollo or ZoomInfo, Cognism, just bring in the email addresses and the data for your target account people and your ICP, and just start to try and give them good offers. You know what I mean? Don't put them into stupid nurtures or like things that don't really matter. When you have something interesting to say to them, like you have a webinar or an event that's coming up that you want to invite them to, or you have some kind of unique thing for them, a new benchmark report, use it sparingly that way to get in front of them with content that's actually going to help them. And don't expect that to turn into demand, or to like say, maybe don't even put an email in that has a demo request in it. Just learn more. Just thought you might want to be interested. You thought you might be interested in this, thought this might help you in your role. And that brings a lot of action and a lot of activity. And then that'll come back to your website, and you're spending like pennies on the dollar as if you were kind of running ads. So you have to pay for the data tool and like the credits associated with bringing them in. And oftentimes, like some of my clients, they'll have like a tiny marketing database of like a couple thousand, but then their outbound team is reaching out to like tens of thousands of people. So you have all these email addresses already, and you have some data from these tools that are like, oh, these people responded in some way, or these people engaged in the email or engaged with us. Take those people and then bring them back into your marketing list. You know, if they want to opt out, they'll opt out. You know what I mean? And you don't have to worry about like, there's relevance. And if you're relevant and not just being like randomly telling them about a product that's not even in their wheelhouse or asking them for a demo, it's relevant. And you're actually, you need to think of it as helping them or educating them in some way or giving them something new to try. That builds trust with those folks. And that's a way that email can actually work, because then at some point they'll figure out what you do, they'll look at your website, and then when they're ready, they'll convert. And so that's just, if you don't have any money, you've got to leverage data, and you've got to leverage like these higher volume tactics, but in a different way that's just valuable to them.
Yeah, and super good advice, Jason. I can just supplement like in a lower scale. There's probably also review platforms in whatever industry you're in, and it's absolutely free to get your customers. Ask them, could you do me a favor? Could you go into this review platform, give us a review? And then slowly you start climbing the ranks of all the different categories, whether you're a pizza place or you're a soft piece of software. There's different categories, and as you collect those reviews, you get more and more attention from these places where you don't make your way to these places without being halfway to being in market, studying different products.
Yeah, and you can automate those as well. So like if you have some kind of a customer health score or some kind of like a milestone-based journey with them, and they've hit this milestone or they've hit this specific health score, you can kind of automate that process. And just like, hey, by the way, we'd love your help in getting a review. That's how we grow. And oftentimes they're like, oh yeah, for sure. I've hit this point. I've hit this milestone. We're having successes, and they're willing to definitely do that for you.
In my last company, we were selling our like screen sharing device on Amazon as well. So we used a product called Delighted to do NPS scores, and depending on what it replied, like either you go to CS or you get this automated mail saying, hey, could you go to Amazon and give us a review? And it worked extremely well. And like particularly if you have in these volume businesses where you have a lot of people you're exposed to, then you can really climb the ranks of these review platforms quite fast.
Well, and there are 3 things nowadays that are almost like non-negotiable for buyers. The first one is they're going to want to read reviews. They want to know that other people like them are using and having success with your platform. So that's one thing to focus on. The second thing is they want to actually talk specifically to somebody that they know that has used or is using your product. So they want to talk to somebody like a LinkedIn connection. By the way, one of the companies I'm working with right now coming out of stealth mode is going to support this word of mouth. Stay tuned.
I met him.
wait, thumbs up going. And then the third thing is they want to get as close to your product as possible before they commit to buying. And so these are things like a PLG motion, a free trial, even like you can get away with it with a product tour, or like best case of all, like a sandbox that they can use. And so those are the three things that today's buyer really, really needs to make that final decision. And so the more you can support those things, which obviously none of those are like paid ads, or, you know, these are things that the word of mouth piece, the review, you know, it's just getting people more comfortable, because people don't have the budget to waste on buying a tool that's not going to, like if I spend $10,000 on a tool, it's got to be give me $10,001 in return. And they need to know that before they're willing to sign on the dotted line. So even things like, if you're really confident in your product, you know, giving them a 12-month contract, but a 3-month opt-out, you know, like, and for no reason, they can just decide on their own. If you're really confident and you're doing really good targeting, that can help, you know, alleviate the buyer's concern and kind of give them new ways to think about it, and not be like super committed and worried about like, is this going to pay off for me or not?
Yeah, and just to supplement, I can like when we went from having a free product from not having a free product to having a free product. When we didn't have the free product, we would always lose against the big established brand because we couldn't prove that our technology had something else. So people chose the safe option. But once the buyers can actually trial it out and see, hey, I can actually trust this younger company with this fresher technology. Okay, I'll go ahead and sign with them.
Yeah. And that's where case studies help, you know, success stories, testimonials.
Jason, there's so many more things that I want to ask you, but we're closing in now on the hour. So before you tell people where they can follow you and buy your services, I'll take one question here from Sultan, and I'll let him be the last person to ask questions. What was the biggest learning for you, Jason, in achieving such revenue growth in only 3 years? Is there anything you wish you could have done more or less? The big question.
My biggest learning was the absolute importance of a strong brand, especially in a crowded market, because a strong brand makes every single other thing you do work better. And so, and I really believed in the beginning, because I come from the ops side, the performance marketing side. I'm like, no, this is a math problem. And like, you know, I spend this and I get this, and I try this over here and I spend this and I get this. That's not the case, you know, like, and so to stand out and to really like make all these other things work better, the importance of your brand, a strong brand, a brand that stands out, that educates and entertains, you know, that people want to be a part of, creating a movement, creating a community. There, you just cannot overstate the importance of that. And then at the same time, that's the hardest thing to basically get founders to really lean into, because your CFO is like, what's the return on our brand spend? And you're like, I don't know, and I'll never know. So you're just gonna have to understand that this is gonna work, or like we're not gonna grow. So yeah, that's probably what was my biggest learning and in that time, for sure.
Like even more as we see, there's only the ad platforms that are there right now. So buyers are going to these ad platforms, and these ad platforms works like marketplaces. So it's just going to get more and more expensive. And the only thing you can do against that is to develop a strong, significant brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that doesn't have to cost a lot of money, you know, so.
All right, Jason, I should have asked you in the beginning, but what is it you actually do nowadays? And if people want to work with you nowadays, what can they do?
Yeah, so I run a tiny little consultancy called Peak B2B Marketing. peakb2b.co is my website. I advise, you know, early stage startups. I consult with early stage startups, kind of run the gamut from just advising all the way through execution. So yeah, if you're looking for something like that, let me know, or just connect with me on LinkedIn and kind of see some of the random things I say.
Thank you so much, Jason. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I could do another session easily with all these questions. So we might have to catch up next quarter as well. But thank you so much for joining, and to all of you who are following us, just thanks a lot long for staying on. You've been a lot of people all through the hour. So thank you, and have a great evening in Europe and a great day in the US.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stefan. Really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody.